Enterprises struggle to detect advanced attacks quickly and thoroughly as evolving threats continue to evade current security tools. Skillful threat detection starts with diverse, high-value security telemetry to run detections on. The Chronicle platform allows security teams to store and analyze petabytes of data in one place so that you can quickly apply powerful detection rules against all of your security data. Learn more about the Chronicle platform and the latest threat detection capabilities at securityweekly.com/chronicle. Optics has built a platform for SQL-powered security analytics. Extending the OS query agent, Optics collects, aggregates, and analyzes a wide range of system data and makes that available to solve multiple security challenges. Their solution provides visibility across Linux, macOS, Windows, containers, and cloud workloads. Their customers are using the Optics platform for fleet visibility, intrusion detection, investigation, and audit and compliance. Visit securityweekly.com/Optics and be one of the first to see how they've mapped over 500 behavioral rules to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Detecting and responding to threats in the cloud is harder than doing it on-prem. Even when you do have the visibility you need, legacy security workflows weren't designed for the speed and complexity of cloud environments. Cloud-native security solutions from ExtraHop are purpose-built to spot threats across the hybrid attack surface, provide detailed investigation steps, and help you automate response. Request your 30-day free trial at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join Amit Barakat, co-founder and CEO of Perimeter 81, and myself for a technical deep dive into the problems inherent in legacy VPN technologies. Together, we will explore solutions for the modern workforce, how momentum towards a perimeterless architecture is helping redefine the future of cybersecurity. Register today at securityweekly.com/perimeter81. This segment is sponsored by Ratehorn. To learn more about Ratehorn's awesome solutions, please visit securityweekly.com/Ratehorn. Joining us today is none other than co-founder and CEO Kevin O'Brien. Kevin, welcome to the show today.
Hey, Paul, how are you? It's good to be here.
Nice to have you. This segment is really interesting. When we were chatting earlier, you were describing an awesome cyber attack, and I'm like, Kevin, you got to come on the show and talk about this. So I'm just going to turn it over to you to kind of describe how this attack works, which sounded a lot more sophisticated than some of the incidents I've been responding to recently.
Yeah, happy to. So about 3 weeks ago now, the threat team at Ratehorn started picking up a number of emails that looked anomalous, and we started identifying them as really having three things that stood out from most of the attacks that we see. And between 1 billion and 1.5 billion emails a month, we see a lot of attack pattern data. But what we picked up here was that there appeared to be a very targeted to senior executive email campaign, phishing campaign, that had started going out across not just the US, but worldwide corporate domains. And when we see an attack generally, we'll see it for 20 to 40% of our customer base. In the first day that we started doing our research, we had seen nearly 60% of our customer base, and that number grew over time, receiving these messages.
And by receiving, I'm sorry, Kevin, by receiving, you mean in their inboxes, not
in their inboxes.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. So Ratehorn, as a reminder, sits as a cloud-native email security solution. It's what the Gartner boys call an IESS solution, which means that it's an integrated email security solution. And those are different from secure email gateways that try to block things pre-delivery by being an extra hop on the MX route into an environment, or the sort of low end of the market, the cloud email security supplement space, where the presumption is there's a small set of problems that your seg isn't getting, and you're going to have to augment it in some way. So the IESS space where we sit is different, and that's usually where an organization says we want something that's deeply integrated into a cloud environment like Office 365 or G Suite, and is looking at all of the different factors around mail, everything from how it was delivered to who received it to the content to how people interact with it. So our data, our telemetry, isn't synthetic, and it's not the sort of thing that will be blocked by a cloud platform provider. What that means is that when we see an attack like this, it's gotten past Microsoft, and it's gotten past Google, and it's gotten past anything else that's filtering traffic before it reaches users. And what we saw in this case was, like I said, this massive set of customers starting to receive these messages. That's normal. We would want to see that. We defang these things in a slightly different way. The attacks that we were watching all contained URLs that were suspicious, and this was before they were marked as malicious in any third-party threat feed or in something like the Safe Browsing API.
Mm-hmm.
And what was interesting about these URLs was that each one of them leveraged a open redirector attack model. An open redirector, as the audience probably knows, means that you can take a domain and as part of a URL query parameter pass through another domain that you're going to go to. But the link itself in the email looks like it's something legitimate. And there are a number of different...
I'm sorry, Kevin. Is it essentially like a proxy server for those?
Yeah, you can think about it that way. If you've ever gone to a website and it's moved, and so you click on some URL and it redirects you somewhere else.
301, 302. Yeah, gotcha.
And an open redirector is bad, right? Open redirectors are open in that anyone can pass a query parameter to that particular domain or URL and go somewhere. And so generally, you don't see these on the open web. And we were seeing them for Sony Europe, for Adobe, for Subway. Brands that people know and recognize and are not being blocked as, someone's compromised WordPress site or something like that. And we did a little bit of additional research that evening when we started seeing this. And the domains that were compromised were all running versions of Apache that hadn't been properly patched. And so they were pre-October 2019 versions of Apache, which meant that there were a couple of exploits that were later fixed, but these brands, we think, hadn't put that patch in place. And so they got popped, and when they were then configured to allow open redirectors. And this probably happened last year, maybe the beginning of this year. And very standard TTP is that the attackers then sat on this asset and waited. And so nobody noticed. And the phishing emails that they sent contained links to, say, like sonyeurope.com/t/ and then the redirector command that would go to where they had deployed a phishing kit. In some circumstances, it was a direct link after the URL. In others, it was a couple of additional hops. So it was bouncing around and doing this to evade detection from a web gateway or a standard URL block list model that orgs often put at their perimeters. Less effective to do that these days because most people are working from home, but it is even more complex if you're looking at Subway and their latest sandwich promotion, and actually that gets taken over and is used for this. The phishing kit that sat behind those redirected domains looks like an Office 365 login, and it was a good one. It looked pixel perfect. And what we then saw was that the email that contained these things had a variety of different approaches to try to socially engineer C-level executives almost exclusively to get them to click on it. And so it would say that they had a Teams meeting that was starting or a Zoom meeting that was starting, or that they had something else that they had to do and there was some urgency around it. And the phishing kits were being hosted in a variety of places, and we saw them on large public cloud infrastructure, some of whom we're close to, and I won't name names, but we reached out to those teams and started working with them on takedown immediately. And what we found was that through the data they shared back to us, there were tens of thousands of clicks through those redirectors. We were blocking them, so our customers were safe. We recognized early that the redirector was anomalous, and no one who was using Ratehorn would be compromised.
Sorry, Kevin, I want to stop you right there because I think that's really interesting. You haven't mentioned the from address or anything in the email header so far. The attacks and defenses and remediation you've talked about are all about the redirector, what's inside the email, and the fish kit that was used. Is there anything interesting in the from field, and also like reasons why we're not focused on that today?
Yeah, highly variable. In some cases, it was obvious. They were accounts that were being used that were meant to have a display name that would say Zoom meeting or something like that, and then it would be a random .nl or .ru address. In other cases, they were what we think were compromised accounts that were probably compromised in a previous attack and were now being used to distribute these new URLs that were being turned on. the from address was not something that an end user would reliably be able to look at and say, oh, I can spot that. In some cases, maybe if you had a very technical person, but in others, they were legitimate accounts. And because they were legitimate accounts, they were getting delivered with legitimate URLs. Sony Europe is not a small brand. And so when somebody would think, oh, I've got to join this Teams meeting, I've got to go look at this document or whatnot, it would prompt them to log in after the redirect, which was very fast, right? Open redirectors don't say, oh, here's the whole website and redirecting you. Right. It immediately redirected it. And then it looks like you have to log in to join the meeting. The efficacy rate is apt to be very high. And we know it worked because our friends at these large cloud hosting companies we're working with, when we did some of the attribution, were able to show us that they had tens of thousands of clicks on a per link basis, and they were seeing tens to hundreds of links, so hundreds of thousands of interactions in just the environments that they shared with us that first evening. And the other side of that was that the phishing kit didn't just ask for your credentials, although that's damaging and difficult, and users will see that and think that it's fine and often give away those credentials. But it also attempted to deploy the Cygox malware, which is a Trojan that's often used in subsequent vishing attacks. It establishes a command and control network that can be used for vishing, amongst other things. So just by visiting the page, you have an endpoint compromise, which again, you've got people working from home, right? So they're on personal laptop or their home PC or whatever, and they may not have corporate endpoint protection deployed. And it's senior execs, right? So folks who have to have a nice home computer, maybe. Right. And
if they were diligent, Kevin, and kept their browsers up to date to the latest version, they weren't immune to this attack, correct?
Correct. In our sandbox environments, even the latest versions of Safari, Firefox, Edge, and Chrome would get the download.
So they had 0 days, and I did see some patches being released for Chrome this week. I'm not sure if those were related or not.
Yeah, there are a number of 0-day things that Chrome has patched and so on and so forth. But what I think is important here, right? We saw this, and of course, you've got a major potential risk. But I thought, well, I mean, not to be a bit base about it, but I thought this is good for the company because we've broken the story, and we're going to reach out to the press, and we'll get people to read about it. And obviously, we want to protect more organizations, and we saw 65 to 75% of our customer base over time receiving these attacks. And although we defanged them, we're a great company and we're growing very quickly, but we don't cover the majority of the world, which means that the organizations that are probably being compromised by this, because we know there were people clicking, it's a vast number. Reached out to the press, and nobody was interested. And nobody was interested because we didn't have blood to show in the water. We said, we've found this, we know who some of the victims are, we know what's going on. And they said, well, great, where's the data breach? And, the story there is not about the data breach. It's the data breach that's going to come in 6 months or 8 months, because you have senior executives from all these organizations whose accounts have been compromised, and machines may have been compromised. And that leads to data theft. That leads to, all kinds of things. And so, we ran the front page article on SC Magazine for a bit was about this attack because we had all of the data, and that was an important piece, and we're grateful for it. But I thought this would be the New York Times or the Washington Post or the nightlies, and they said
to get their attention, Kevin, do you have to do attribution? I feel like that helps. If you want to get mainstream media attention, you say, "Hey, I found this attack." They're like, "Yeah, that's great." And you're like, "Well, I found this attack, and I traced it back to this nation state." Now they're interested.
Right. Yeah. So attribution is something to be very careful about. But I will say this: a couple of days later, there was a very interesting press conference held in the evening, Eastern time, around 9 at night, by DNI, and Ratcliffe came out and talked about this supposed Proud Boys email attack that was going around that they did attribution to Iran for. And I was asked for comment, and it was right after we had looked at this attack, and I said in my commentary, what I initially said before I gone deeply into it, oh, here's all the stuff you think about when you think about compromised credential attacks and why these attacks are probably going on, et cetera, et cetera. And then I retracted my statement. There are PR agency. And unfortunately, they'd already pitched it to the press, which was interestingly, more intriguing. And so the New York Times contacted me and said, okay, is this just a ploy to get us to talk to you? And I said, no, not at all. I don't think that you can look at this and cite Iran. I think that what we're seeing is that this is part of a series of deliberate attacks that bear the hallmarks of what a Russian cyber attack looks like. Iranian cyber attacks have certain characteristics. They typically are using APT. They're also not terribly good on the nation state side, generally speaking, at covering their tracks. Last year, earlier this year, they compromised a series of web servers and literally left video recordings, screen recordings of them breaking in on the servers they compromised, which IBM's team, X-Force team found. So, you don't really get much sloppier than that as an adversary than recording yourself and leaving it on the compromised infrastructure. That's not how Russia tends to work. And Russia tends to be 0-day plus social engineering. And we were in the front page of the New York Times talking about this with some information that we had cited around the attribution. But we also, see similar parallels here. So, I am very careful about attribution. There are organizations in the world that do attribution very, very well, and it's what their entire business model is, and it's not mine. But I've been around for a little bit, and, I see fingerprints in this one, as well as what we talked about vis-a-vis the Proud Boys email campaign that was in the news, that all start to look of a piece. So I think there's a story there, right? Which is that you're looking at an attack and a very widespread attack, probably the largest phishing campaign in terms of reach that I've seen in the 6 years and change that I've been running Ratehorn. And it worked, and it compromised credentials, and it deployed malware, and it went after with success, right? With demonstrable success because of the data we can get from the third parties who are hosting the phishing kits, senior executives of international companies. So, I can probably expand upon that more, but that's a big deal. And it really underscores how sophisticated email security attacks have gotten, and also how susceptible we are, how easy it is to deceive someone, even someone, who's smart and knows better, saying, oh, I checked, it was Sony, it was Adobe. Even if I hover my mouse, I don't think that's weird. And the perimeter security controls just can't keep up.
Kevin, I'm just curious, was the incident response and forensics process able to determine someone who just loaded the page versus entering their credentials?
Yes, but it almost doesn't matter.
Yeah,
because just loading the page deployed malware, which would compromise the machine. And it's easy to go from compromised endpoint to anything you want, right? Access to the boxes, access to everything, including keystroke loggers, et cetera, so we can get your credits that way. And then for some of those users, yes, we can recognize that there was a form submit because it's running on the phishing kit. You can see what happens with the net traffic after that. So you've got credential theft attacks, and you've got malware deployments, hundreds of thousands of them related to this attack.
Matt.
So, Kevin, now that we've seen this activity, what do organizations do? How do they find out whether they've been compromised or not? Is there anything they can do now, post-fact, or did they have to do something beforehand? And I do want to follow up with lessons learned from this type of attack. What should they be doing? But is there anything they can do now?
Yes. So we wrote a pretty detailed blog post and put it up on the Ratehorn website under resources blog. And we detailed the patterns of the redirectors. Because these were all Apache compromises, the redirector pattern was consistent. And we put up enough information that you can run a regex against both your email environment, and also you can look for if you're running people through a VPN, web traffic, and try to see if anyone hit those sites. That information, it's a fairly lengthy post, but it's all up there. We put that out so that anyone can go and do that work and identify it. Searching for that kind of data can be difficult, and especially if you're in a 365 environment or a G Suite environment, running in a major query like that for a large organization. Our big customers get 20 to 30 million emails every day. So you're writing a PowerShell query to go and pull mail and look at it from a content perspective. That's going to be tough. So you can do it, but it's going to take you a little bit. But you should. And you can narrow that focus down to senior execs, because we did see it hit only C-levels and VPs, and that's consistent across the whole base. The normal approach that you should take does not change. You should have MFA enabled. You should rotate all passwords regularly. And for even users that are on endpoints that they might own, make sure you've got some kind of endpoint protection. That is a big deal. A well-patched endpoint provider should catch this. Sandbox isn't brand new. It wasn't a 0-day from a malware perspective, even though the browser JavaScript exploit was. So, that's a little bit of closing the barn door, et cetera, but you should go do those things. And our blog post contains a lot of that information and IOCs that you can go look for.
I always like to use the expression, is the juice worth the squeeze? And if we dissect a bit the squeeze, attackers set up infrastructure and compromise email accounts so that they could actually send the email, which was step one. Step two was they had to find some open redirects and went through the work of doing that, cataloging them, and finding those particular vulnerable redirect servers. Then they had to secure infrastructure to host the phishing kit. They had to get the phishing kit, and then they burned 0 days as part of this whole campaign. That's not just a lot of work, but they also burned some of their TTPs in this whole attack, and that had to all be worth it for them. And I think you could lead it to that C-level executives at major international companies are that much of a target that attackers will go through all that work and burn some of their own tools and techniques for that.
Yeah, and think about what that means, right? So sophisticated phishing attacks are you in the office? I need you to go buy me gift cards. All that stuff shockingly works. We did a study, and we ran a 1,200-ish person study not long ago, and maybe for a future conversation we dive more deeply into that. But you can see that people fall for this stuff. You get about a 52% rate of people identifying phish. And generally speaking, they're identifying it in the wrong direction. So people will identify phish 52% of the time, and often when it isn't a phish. So we're really bad at this stuff. So senior execs are exempt from that. But the credit theft attack that we're talking about allows those attackers to now do the really damaging stuff, which is to say, monitoring email and waiting. And then, we see this. We saw this at a large hospital group that we protect. Attacker deletes a legitimate email as part of a vendor invoice. And they don't do anything else. They sit on that. And the vendor says, oh, you didn't pay us. Send another one, delete it. Then they start to get phone calls. Oh, you're behind. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. And when the finance team says, oh, you're right, fix that. And the email comes in, they delete the legit invoice one and insert the fraudulent invoice because they have access to the attack, or they'll mutate an email, or they'll do something like that. So when you start to think about what these attacks look like, being able to create those conditions, that's how you steal millions of dollars in a phishing campaign. It's not go buy me some gift cards. It's build all of the social engineering infrastructure so you can watch, how does this team send email? Who are they working with? Where are the big contracts? Or can I get access to sensitive data? And of course, you can go down the path of then stealing crown jewel information, selling on the dark web, et cetera. But it all begins with, I have real access to a real account. And if I'm now popped as a CEO or a VP of finance or a head of human resources, chief people officer, I can do all kinds of things. And they're going to be low and slow, under the radar, and give me access as the attacker to all of these really costly attacks. And to your point, is the juice worth the squeeze? Well, what's that being used for? This isn't somebody most likely going on vacation with the money they steal. It gets funneled into terrorism and money laundering and so on and so forth. So yeah, when we start talking about attribution, this probably wasn't somebody with an IQ of 197 or whatever it is that you're supposed to have and 15% of your password. This is a nation state.
Yeah. It's interesting, right, Kevin, because the level of accounts that they have now makes that business email compromise more likely to happen, because they can manipulate at the VP, the C level, to actually make changes or insert emails to actually allow that attack to happen. And that's really scary when you think about it from an organizational standpoint, is because they may not ever see it coming.
No, they won't. And the things you then need to start thinking about are not what most email security postures. So I'm not talking about technology. I'm just talking about the postures that organizations take. It's not what they zero in on. So they're thinking about, okay, how am I going to, as the defender, look for external mail and market all as external? We see that all the time. Or how am I going to look for malicious hash or something like that? And that's all fine. You can do that stuff, but that's table stakes. You need to now start looking at, how am I mapping internal relationships and social graphs, and thinking about, is this an abnormal message, especially if it references certain kinds of sentiment, financial transaction language, or there's a URL that's unusual, or if you see an account takeover, the account takeover is an example of an attack where the bad guy is sitting in front of a keyboard somewhere, right? And they're probably in front of O365 Outlook Web Access writing email. And that's completely legitimate mail, and it's going to flow intra-tenant if it's an internal attack, so it's not even going to go through mail authentication. So you've got to start thinking about, how do I disrupt those kinds of attacks? And one approach is to go into a model kind of like what we've built for our clients, where you use keystroke biometrics. And I think we've talked about this previously, but the patterns that you use when you type are unique. They're like a fingerprint. And you can get 95% accuracy on both mobile and keyboard keystrokes. And then you can use that to say, is that credential now being used with somebody who's typing differently? Because that can be an indicator that there's something that's gone on. And really, you've got to start thinking creatively when you're looking at these sorts of attacks. If you're a 25-person company that's not super worried about it, because you can turn around, and can't anymore, but in the old days you could, you might say, all right, we're going to live at the risk. But once you're over a couple hundred people, and we see this in multinational companies with tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of employees, you don't know. And if the CEO emails you and says, I need you to do this, and you're a director or a senior director, you're probably going to go do it. So what you want is something that's able to say, that's not the CEO. Those credentials were popped somehow. Right. And we think that's happening, and we have this information, biometric information, or social graph information, to allow you to disrupt it. And legacy technology and platforms just don't offer those capabilities. It's just not possible to interrupt those attacks.
And awareness and training, that plays in, but it's definitely not the complete picture in what you're describing. For sure.
Yeah, you put your finger on it. I think that security awareness training is critically important. You have to do it. And I say that as an organization, we don't sell security awareness training, right? It's orthogonal to our space. And we have relationships and friendships with most of the big vendors. And the criticality of that is that you need to be able to say, look, we know that at baseline, it's a coin flip as to whether or not people can detect whether something is or isn't phishing. And if I can increase my odds, even 10 or 20%, that's phenomenal. And that's going to make a big difference. People are 13% more likely to fall for a phishing attack if they receive it on a mobile device, which is an interesting stat from one of the studies we ran. So, if I can start to take that from worse than a coin flip and at least bring it to something a bit better and train people, that helps. But you have to augment that, and you have to augment it by giving them information. And so it's one thing to teach people what to look for. It's another thing to give people in the moment practical training, to say, this isn't just a theoretical where I've taught you, I should look at, and you describe some of it, return paths and reply tos and the from domain. That's fine. But you also need to give people in the moment, hey, right here, this is how this works in the real world. And you can draw analogies between other ways that we train people to deal with crises. You train people in the classroom, but then you have to put them in the environment and actually have them run through the procedure. And your email security technology should do that. It should say, remember that thing we said about suspicious URLs? Remember that moment we said to look for someone you don't know? You don't know this person. It's going to be right there in front of you, right, bright red and flashing, telling you don't know this person, or this link is suspicious. And if you do those things in conjunction, they work. If you only do one of them, you're depriving yourself of not just layering two pieces of security on top of one another, but creating a synergistic relationship between your training program and your security program.
Fantastic. I also, in promotion of your solution, Kevin, love that you accomplish all of this without requiring an agent that goes on all of the systems. I think that's super cool.
Again, agents are fine for certain things. If I'm trying to protect ring 0 attacks on the kernel of my servers, I want an agent, and that's fine. But like this is not 1999, and I can't issue a corporate device for everybody, and people are going to grab, their personal devices. I'm going to do email on my phone, or I'm going to be doing it on my home computer or whatever. So you've got to start thinking about, how do I provide this level of information in an integrated way? And one of those distinctions of the IESS model and the approach of being integrated into the email platform versus supplementing it with something is, does this thing really weave in at the API level with my cloud platform provider and give me that protection where I don't worry what device a user's in front of or what mail client they're in front of, because that stuff changes all the time. And good luck, especially in 2020 and beyond, controlling the endpoint environment with any kind of regularity. You can get a little bit down the path, but it's got to be fully integrated into the email environment itself.
Agreed. For folks that want to learn more and get a demo, securityweekly.com/Greathorn. Kevin, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Thanks, guys. Matt, Paul, take care.
With that, stay tuned. Coming up next, Mike Campfield from Extra Hop. Stay tuned.